it, if you'll allow me, is that Samson is doing whatever is right in his own eyes. And behind the scenes, God is going to manipulate and use this unrighteousness for his purpose. What's his purpose? His purpose is to ultimately deliver Israel from the Philistines. He needs a judge to inflict judgment. So he gives this super strong Samson, this ultimate man type guy. He raises him up. Here's how he's going to do it. Samson really is just concerned about what he likes. Hey, I like that woman. I think I'll marry her. There's honey. I like honey. I'll take some of that. And so you have this carefree living that Samson's doing. And in behind the scenes, God is working. We'll get to the point here in just a moment. If you'll allow me just to summarize the story, that they get to the 7-day wedding feast, and Samson thinks he's real clever and asks 30 guys about this riddle. And he says, I've got a riddle for you. If you can answer the riddle, I'll buy you each a new set of clothes. If you can't, you give me each a set of clothes. I think he was trying to figure out how can he expand his wardrobe. You know, he's getting married. He wants to look good for the wife, and so he needs 30 new sets of clothes. Well, if you remember the story, the woman goes that Samson is going to marry goes, and of course she's loyal to the Philistines, and says to him, you know, how can you say you love me? You don't even tell me the riddle. And Samson's like, well, I didn't even tell mom and dad the riddle. Why would I tell you the riddle? And she's like, tell me the riddle. And she puts on the feminine charm, and he tells the riddle. And of course, then she goes and tells it to the 30 guys who he made the bet with. And they, of course, on the last day, they answer the riddle. And Samson's mad. He says, you know, it's kind of an interesting phrase, had you not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle. In other words, had you not gone to my wife and asked, you never would have solved it. Verse 19, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power, and he went down to Ashkelon, another Philistine city. He struck down 30 of their men, stripped away all their belongings, and gave the clothes to those who explained the riddle. Okay, so we sort of got judgment, right? We got 30 guys dead now. It's not a lot. Down in Ashkelon, that's not even the right place, really. But nonetheless, he's starting, and he's just dealing with his little riddles that he's telling. Nonetheless, he's powered, verse 19, from the Spirit of the Lord. Okay? Later on, he's really mad, and so he goes away, and he comes back later and says, well, I at least want to get my wife out of this. And the dad's like, well, you know the custom that when we have a wedding feast, someone's got to get married. So you left, so I gave your wife to the next guy who married her. Now he's really mad. Okay, so he gets this idea, and again, I'll summarize. He catches 300 foxes. Don't know how he does that. Text doesn't really tell us that, but ties their tails together, puts torches in them, and lets them free in the Philistine fields. It's harvest time, and so he burns all their grain. Essentially, he's going to cause somewhat of a famine, which again is something like the judgment that God was looking for, but not exactly. But again, Samson's not worried about God's judgment. He's not worried about delivery. He's just mad because someone took his wife. And so he plays that out here. Chapter 15, verse 7. So the Philistines went up and burned her and her father to death. Samson said to them, since you've acted like this, I won't stop until I get my revenge on you. He attacked them viciously and slaughtered many of them, and he went down and stayed at a cave in the rock of Etam. So Samson's going to live this life of, you mess me up, you get me mad, you get my wrath. And the text is showing clearly that God's design is they should be delivered from the Philistines, and Samson's design is actually, I kind of want to be a Philistine. He lives there, he picks his wife from there, he spends all his time there, and so we have these diverse paths here. Samson's doing his own thing, gifted by God, but doing his own thing, and God is, even in his rebellion, is using it for his glory. Well, simply he goes and he comes up with more reasons to kill more people. They try and bind him, and he gets up in the middle of the night, and he rips the gates off the city, which is kind of like losing your front door. If you couldn't lock your front door, if you had no front door, even if you're going to run to Lowe's and replace your front door, you're going to have to leave your front door open it's just not that easy. So if you have a city without gates, it's like losing, your front door, and your back door. So he is delivering them. He's just not delivering them. Just kind of follow the story, okay? So you don't want to get that confused. He's delivering them. He's not delivering them, okay? He's just doing his own thing for his own reason and his own purposes. Chapter 16, one day Samson went to Gaza, and he saw a prostitute, and he went to spend the night with her, and the people said, Samson's here, so they all waited to surround the place and wait for him at all night at the city gate, and they made no move during the night, saying all at dawn. Oh, sorry, and that's where he rips the gates off the city. Verse 4, sorry, that's where I meant to get to. Sometime later, he fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek named Delilah. Again, the Bible is giving us details. Many times it gives us something. We always got to kind of ask why. Why are you telling us the valley of Sorek? Well, if you go find it on a map, we're back in Philistine territory. Okay, so he's looking for another woman down in Philistine territory. He finds this woman named Delilah, and you all kind of know what's going to happen here. The rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, see if you can lure him into showing you the secret of his great strength and power. Now, that's a trick statement. What does Samson think is the source of his great strength and power? His uncut hair, right? The Nazirite vow. So he's violated the Nazirite vow, it seems, in every way other than cutting his hair. It seems that he never actually has cut his hair. So he thinks it's his hair that makes him strong. You remember the story? She asks, and he says, well, tie me up this way, and they tie him up, and he breaks free. And then, well, no, I was just joking, just tie me up this way, and you'll never, and he tie him up, and then he breaks free again. And then, well, if you weave my braids into a loom, right, then you can do it. And they weave his braids in a loom, he breaks free from that, and so on and so forth. And then eventually says, if you shave my head. And it's interesting. Verse 17, chapter 16. So he tore everything, no razor had ever been used on his head. He said, because I've been a Nazirite set apart from God from birth, if my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as any other man. Delilah goes and did that, and it says he awoke from his sleep and thought, I'll go out and shake myself free as before. But he did not know the Lord had left him. Now, either one, the Lord was in his hair, and then we got his hair shaved off, or the strength wasn't in the hair, it was in the Spirit of the Lord. Well, you know the story. He's now vulnerable. He's had his head shaved. And the Philistines seized him. They gouged out his eyes. This guy is doing what is right in his own eyes, and ultimately it catches up with him, and they gouge out his eyes. Verse 21, the Philistines seized him and gouged out his eyes and took him down to Gaza, binding him in bronze shackles. They sent him to grinding in the prison. But the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. Now the rulers of the Philistines assembled to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon their god, to celebrate, saying, our God has delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hands. Think about the statement. God picks this baby, this couple that's not going to have a baby, allows them to get pregnant. This boy, set apart from birth to deliver Israel. It's going to be the defeat of Dagon and the Philistines and the exaltation of Yahweh, the one true God, in Israel. And now Dagon and the Philistines are celebrating their victory over God's man. I mean, this is exactly what God didn't want. Here's what they say. Our God has delivered our enemy into our hands, the one who laid waste to our land and multiplied our slain. While they were in high spirits, they shouted, bring out Samson to entertain us. And so they called Samson out of the prison and to perform for them. When he stood among the pillars, Samson said to the servant when he held his hand, put me where I can feel the pillars that support the temple so that I might lean against them. Now the temple was crowded with men and women. All the rulers of the Philistines were there. All the rulers of the Philistines were there. All the rulers of the Philistines were there. And on the roof were about 3,000 men and women watching Samson perform. And Samson prayed to the Lord God, O sovereign God, remember me, O God. Please strengthen me just once more and let me, with one blow, get my revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. I'm trying to do what's right in my own eyes, God. Right? He's concerned about his revenge. We right now have a pagan god having victory over what's perceived a victory over Yahweh, the one true God. And Samson's concerned about his eyes. Nonetheless, he prays, and God answers. Then Samson reached toward the 2 central pillars in which the temple stood. Bracing himself against them, he put the right hand on the one and his left hand on the other, and Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. So you just want to kind of picture this as the right hand is on one of these pillars, and the left hand is on the other pillar, and he says, let me die with the Philistines, and the text says, and he pushed with all his might. Who said? The text is setting us up to help us think, what is Samson, the deliverer of Israel, the unfaithful, faithful one? What does it say? Then he pushed with all his might, and down came the temple, all the rulers of the people in it. Thus he killed many more when he died than when he lived. Then his brothers and his father and his whole family went down to get him. They brought him back and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of Manoah, his father. He had led Israel 20 years. And so we have a very interesting thing that we draw from the story of Samson. Samson, in his faithlessness, was used faithfully by God. In other words, we've got an option here. Here's the thing. You can be a lousy dad, right? You can be a terrible husband. And God can accomplish his purposes in your family and with your children and with your spouse in spite of you. Now, if you do that, you reap the consequences of that life, which is what Samson did. All the gifting in the world Samson had, he wasted all of it. Right? In sports, we talk about wasted talent, right? You got the quarterback who's got the amazing arm, but got the lousy personality, and they're wasted or whatever the sport, whatever the situation. Well, here's a guy gifted by God for delivering God, and all he is concerned about himself, and God still gets the victory. What was God's purpose? He wanted to defeat the Philistines. How did he defeat them? Well, he let Samson wreak revenge for his eyes. All the Philistine leaders are in one room, 3,000 on the roof, and he allows Samson to die with them. God accomplishes purposes. As they're worshiping Dagon for the victory over Yahweh, God is still accomplishing his purposes. And so we see what God does, and then we see our own situation, which is, how do we want to live? Every one of us gifted in some way for something. Everyone has a purpose within their family and within their friends and their work and their circle of influence. We're all given that ability. We can say no. We can say, I'm going to be unfaithful. And we will live with the results of our sin as Samson did. But God will accomplish his purposes. And so the anti-story of Samson is the story of God sending his son, who died in the exact same position. Same position, but totally different. Jesus, in his faithfulness, gives us the antithesis to Samson in his faithlessness. Well, typical of God in his graciousness, look at what God does to Samson. We've kind of skimmed over the 4 chapters where Samson is mentioned in the Bible, except for one. One more mention of Samson. Hebrews chapter 11. The Hall of Fame of Faith. In chapter 11, verse 32, it says, and don't forget about Samson and Barak, and it mentions some others who were used by God in judgment and deliverance. And so Samson is this faithless, faithful, mostly doing his own thing, but still accomplishing God's purposes. And all of a sudden, that probably looks like your life and mine. Right? None of us probably have a perfect testimony where we're getting up here and going, well, look at me. I mean, my life is a model of how we should be. Well, we don't have a lot of look at me's, do we? What we have is a lot of us feel a lot like Samson. Wasted opportunities. We have things that we're sorry about in the past. We did this, we shouldn't have done that, and I lived like this, and I wasted money here, and I wasted time there, and I wasted talent over here, and so on and so forth. And God uses that for his glory. So much so that the faithlessness of Samson had enough faith to be in the Hall of Fame. Exactly where you didn't think you'd find Samson. Having faith like Samson. So we get this incredible texture of how our God works, using us, if you will, in spite of ourselves, for his glory. I thought it was an interesting twist that the author of Judges gives us as a little glimpse to how God is gracious. And that same graciousness of God can be gracious, of course, in our lives.